Well, if you remember back around Christmas, we had that terrible ice storm, especially in the southeastern part of Oklahoma, where a lot of trees were damaged, a lot of limbs were broken, and even now we have a lot of calls with people wondering what they need to do to clean up their trees. So with us today is Mark Bays. How you doing, Mark? Mark's been on our program several times.
Yep.
He is the Urban Forestry Coordinator for the State Department of Agriculture. And Mark, can you tell us a little bit about what the homeowner can do to clean these trees up?
Right, if we can certainly remember all the problems that we had this past winter with the severe ice storm damage that we had just shortly after Christmas, we are still seeing a lot of that damage still in place. We've been getting phone calls pretty much from the day after from concerned homeowners that are wanting to know whether or not their trees may or may not survive this tragedy. And I guess the question they first need to ask themselves is how much of the tree was damaged? Is it a little bit of damaged? Is it a lot damaged? And then take a look at the size of limbs that were broken on the trees.
Okay. With this tree here, it looks like we have a lot of small limbs pretty high up in the canopy.
Right.
So what should we do in this situation?
Well, this homeowner was actually particularly lucky because there wasn't too much damage done to this tree. It's relatively small diameter branches. If you look, there's probably just a few 2-inch caliper limbs that have been damaged and everything. From the total canopy perspective, you know, you're looking at probably less than 5% of the total percent of this tree is gone. Now, the fact that it's dead and still hanging in the tree, that may be a small concern too, particularly if children play out here, if this is a high traffic area. So these dead branches certainly should be coming out of the tree relatively soon. One of the other problems that we have with dead branches in a tree, whether they're connected or dislodged like this, of course, is that it invites other problems to come into the tree, whether it be decay problems or whether it's insect problems. It is something else in addition to the ice storm damage that, you know, the homeowner should be concerned about.
Okay, so if that broken limb is still attached to the tree, that just is an open door to all these problems.
Yeah, exactly. And so the things, you know, if the homeowner was fortunate to only have a small amount of damage to their tree, if that damage hasn't been corrected yet, I would most definitely suggest that they hire a consulting or a certified arborist to come out and do that kind of pruning. If it's too big of a job for them to handle, certainly hire a professional to do it. But you have talked a great number of times about proper pruning on a number of your segments, and that's the one thing I guess that we would also support, is to make sure that any kind of pruning you do on the tree, whether it's removing the dead, the hangers like in this case, or even thinning out the tree, that they do follow proper pruning guidelines.
Okay, and there's some help that the homeowners can, a number they can call?
They can call us in the Department of Agriculture Forestry Services, and our phone number is 405-522-6158, and we'll be happy to send them out information.
Okay. Well, this is some minor damage here, Mark. I guess we have another tree to take a look at.
Right. There's one I think that you'll see that's just a little bit worse off than this one.
So Mark, here with this really major damage on this tree, what should the homeowner be thinking about in this situation?
Right, this is some damage that we had happen just this past weekend with all the storms that we had come through Oklahoma City. And as you can see, it's much more severe than we saw at the previous site. Now, this is starting to concern me when we see this kind of damage on the tree, because what you're seeing is essentially half of that one branch now no longer existing on the tree. If you take a real close look, it's all jagged right there, and so that is a stressful point on the tree. With this type damage, and with all the additional damage on some of the other branches that are broken and laying on the ground, we're seeing probably a little bit more than half the tree actually is being lost right now. If you think about where you can make the proper pruning cuts on this tree to recover from the broken branches, I'm not really seeing any good places to do that. And so that, coupled with the fact that now half of the trees are gone, so half of the food production of the tree is gone. With the structural problems, I would think that this would be one that the homeowner may consider actually removing. I mean, it's sad, but it's just one of those things that you just have to make the tough call every now and then.
Okay, so if possibly half of the tree in most situations, or just you think in this situation?
Well, if you think about, you know, half of the food production of the tree being gone, could you survive on half?
I couldn't. I don't think I could.
On half of that? So that's one thing to consider. Now, it is possible, if it's a healthy, vigorous growing tree, if you lost half of the crown and structurally it's not any kind of a problem posing a threat for failure or something like that, then you may consider just letting the tree go for a couple of years and just to kind of see if it can replace all that leaf cover to support itself again with the food production. So if there's no structural problems and you've lost half of the tree, then you may consider letting it go for a year or two and see how it responds. But in this case, because that is a real stressful point on there that may fail at some time in the future, I would think this one you probably should go ahead and remove.
Okay, so that wound is just, it's so big and just in the position there, it just, you don't think that would heal over right?
No, I don't think it would ever really seal over to the point to where the tree will recover from that. It's such a large wound, it's jagged up in there. It's essentially half of the trunk is now exposed wood. And so during that sealing process, as it begins to callus over, that's going to be open up to insect damage, infestation, disease problems, internal rot and decay. So the chances are that that tree would never seal over and compartmentalize and close off that problem before you had failure.
Okay, well that's too bad. Well, in certain situations when homeowners are going to be doing some remodeling around their homes, or in the case where they're building a new home and they've got existing trees on the site, I guess there are a few things that they can do to protect those trees?
Yeah, and those kinds of things need to be done in the early stages of construction. I've seen and been called out to a lot of houses who have done additions or are building on a wooded site, and there's been a lot of problems. The trees begin to die because they don't take a few precautions. There's a site that I know about actually on the state capitol where we can go and take a look at that they're doing some good things around some existing trees.
Okay, let's go take a look at that.
All right.
Well, Mark, here at the state capitol with a new dome going on, there's a lot of construction going on, and we've got a pretty large construction site here, and the landscape could really take a beating. So there's lots of things we have to think about to keep the landscape intact.
Right. This is certainly something that the state can be proud of because there's a whole lot of good things going on. And you're absolutely right. Anytime you do any kind of construction, whether it's around the state capitol like this or construction that people do around home, there's some certain things that you need to consider, particularly if there's established landscape in the area that you're wanting to do the construction.
Okay. And here to tell us a little bit about this project is John Jameson.
Yes, Capitol Dome Builders.
Good to see you again, John.
Yeah,
good to see you.
One of the first things we had to do, guys, was make sure that what were we going to disturb on the Capitol grounds. We had to make a planning of where we're going to place our construction equipment. What's it going to do to affect our landscaping, and what are we going to do to protect it if possible. There's certain things we had to do, so we came up with what we call a site disturbance plan. One of the first things we laid out was where can the tower crane go, what trees were going to be involved, what landscaping was going to be affected. One of the first things we did after placing the equipment was discovered that one of the major trees of the Capitol building, one of the oldest trees on the Capitol building site, was going to be in harm's way. Okay. So we got together with the Department of Central Services and the Forestry Department and decided what can we do, and we met on the Capitol grounds to discuss the trees. Some of the trees that had to be moved and relocated because they were going to be in the construction site. The major tree, the pecan tree, was talked about at great length of what can we do to protect it. We had additional landscaping that all the soils and that had to be removed simply because of construction equipment that had to be brought in here, heavy loads. We knew that that was going to bog down our equipment, so we actually physically took out the soils and replaced it with gravel to build up enough base to haul in the heavy equipment. And after, of course, after we're through with the project, we'll reverse it and take the gravel out and put the topsoil back in. But one of the major things we did in working with Mark here was try to figure out what can we do to protect this beautiful pecan tree and something that's been around the Capitol building for quite a long time. Mark can tell you about the protection and what we needed to do, because we were kind of foggy as to what do we do to protect a tree. So we're just construction guys, so we brought in the expert Mark.
Well, that's what we really appreciate, the involvement of the private sector with Capitol Dome Builders as well as Central Services, and that's what's so unique about this particular project, is because all the collective groups are working together to make sure that all their issues are resolved, as well as the dome's coming up and all the landscaping is provided for.
Right.
Some of the things, particularly around the pecan tree here, that we need to address was, John mentioned all the heavy trucks that had to be coming in. If you get those too close to the tree, well, you're going to be crushing the roots of the tree. So what we had to determine is what was the critical root zone of protection that we were going to establish around that tree. And one of those things that we did was we kind of did some collective bargaining throughout the whole process to understand what their needs were, to understand what the tree's needs were, and essentially that's what we came up with here. So this tree protection fence was put up. In other words, we just created this tree protection fence to not allow any traffic on the other side of the fence. And that's what's most critical here, because with the soils and with the tree's roots being well out beyond the drip line, you can do some real serious damage with just by one vehicle driving over those roots.
Just one trip across the roots.
Just one trip across the roots can crush those important feeder roots that are providing the life source for the tree. And so we determined what that optimum area would be around the tree to protect those roots on, and we established this do not pass go, do not do anything beyond the inside of this fence zone here.
We also had to find out from Mark how much water did it need. Could we just come out with a garden hose once a day and water it? But one of the unique things we did was work out through the sprinkler system is to come up with something that we could turn on and turn off without a whole lot of involvement every day. But one of the things we needed to know is how much water does the tree need, and we came up with the sprinkler system that you see underneath the tree right now.
Okay. And this is a new system, a makeshift irrigation system that you put together.
Yes, it is.
It's a temporary system that really just essentially waters the tree inside the protection zone. The other thing that we did was we brought in some mulch to kind of help protect the tree's roots, particularly around the perimeter of the tree, and that kind of helps insulate them from the heat that we have in the summer and surely the cold that we have in the winter. We did do quite a bit of pruning because the tree's shape was much larger and it was going to impact the area where they were going to have to erect the crane. But we used certified arborists to come out and make correct pruning cuts early in the season. And so those cuts on the tree are sealing over, and the tree really hasn't been impacted by that. Its shape, it may not be as symmetrical today as it was before the project started. What we're going to do after the project's over with is come back in and begin to balance the tree back out and kind of get that shape back that it had before the construction started.
Okay. Well, the homeowners could certainly do the same thing, and even though it's their home tree, it's not an old tree that's been on the grounds of a state capitol for many years. The same steps would apply and certainly be well worth the effort.
Absolutely, and I think with our summer that we had, particularly July, with the heat that we had, you could see the color of the tree and you can see everything about it, that it appears to be doing quite well. Now there's some real problems that we could have seen if these kinds of provisions were not provided for, like the root protection zone. John mentioned the grade change around the site, and anytime you have any kind of grade change around a site, you run the risk of putting in a lot of soil around the tree's root system or pulling that soil away from the tree's root system, and that could cause a tree to go into serious decline as well. There's some sites that we could take you to that we can see that these kinds of things were not considered early in the project, and there's quite a bit of fill material that's been placed around trees. And we can really see that these trees are really having some serious problems. There's some areas like around established pecan trees, just like this was, that there's parking lots and there's quite a bit of fill material that's going around the entire root system of that tree, and that tree, it's not even there. It died years ago when the project was going in, but it didn't show the physical signs until a couple years later. So that's what's really important for anybody doing any kind of construction around trees should know, is that there's some simple things that you can do understand what the tree's needs are, understand that there's a lot of that tree underground that you need to address, and if you do so and then you're careful throughout the whole construction process, you'll have a finished project. In this case, it's going to be the Capitol Dome that we all can be very proud of, but then also you'll be able to preserve the legacy of the site where you're doing the construction. On this particular case, it's an elm or it's a pecan tree that happens to be one of the largest, oldest pecan trees on the state capitol grounds.
And well worth protecting, I might add.
Absolutely.
Well, I think you guys have done an excellent job with the preservation here. I think it's going to be exciting to see when the dome is on and the landscape is put back the way it was. And I understand there's some trees that were moved out of this area.
That's right. One of the things John mentioned too is like a lot of the landscaping had to be changed, and there were some historically significant trees that were located in this site here where all the traffic's at.
Okay.
What they did was they employed a tree care company to come out and physically remove those trees from the site, and they're over in a temporary holding facility just across the way over here. And they're going to be moved back eventually once the site's been cleared and all the soil's been put back. So if you wanted, we could go take you a look over there at those trees.
Sure, your temporary nursery.
Temporary nursery,
Okay.
That's right.
All the trees here in your holding nursery certainly look like they are doing great, and looks like they'll survive okay and be ready to be planted back when that site's ready to be replanted.
Yeah, these are some of the significant historical type trees that we talked about that it wasn't really, we weren't going to remove them over there. And these were located in that area right around where all the construction activity was going on. So we employed the services of a tree moving company to come out with a 90-inch tree spade and temporarily move them over here early in the spring. They've been healed in, and they have a new watering system around here to water the trees. As you can see, a lot of the trees have some real nice green color to them, and so those are certainly doing fine. This particular one we're standing next to here is a tree that we planted. It was donated by then Senator Bill Gustafson of Whitetail Tree Farm, and we planted it during an Arbor Day celebration. And you can kind of get a sense here that there is still just a little bit of burning going on around the leaves of the tree. Now this is something that we've really seen a lot this past year on newly planted trees. There's just a little bit throughout this tree. We're going to monitor it, take a real close look at it. Bud Dolan with Central Services is out here all the time looking at these trees, and so he's keeping a close watch on it. There's just a little bit of browning on these leaves, so it may not be of too much of a concern for us. And so people that planted trees this past year may be experiencing this same thing. One of the things that you can do to find out, let's just say you planted a tree this year and a lot of the leaves turned brown and fell off. Well, we've been getting a lot of calls, well, is my tree dead? There's some things that you can do to kind of test to see just how far along your tree is. One of the things, of course, is to take a look on the branch where you may have a browning leaf and kind of check for pliability on the branch. If it's pliable, it still may be some moisture underneath the bark. The other test is to do the thumbnail test. On this one, you can see that there's some green underneath the bark there. And then you can also look at the bud here and notice that the bud is certainly a little bit pliable and there's some green still in the bud. So that tells us that even though the leaves are beginning to turn brown on this branch and that they're no longer here, that may still be alive. So that's why when I look at this tree and I see all these buds and everything, it doesn't concern me that there's some browning of the leaves. Now, certainly if that was a little bit more widespread throughout your tree, so in other words, if the whole tree had turned brown,
Maybe
then
dropped its leaves,
then that may be more of a concern. If you planted trees late in the season this year, and I've seen a lot of people planting container trees late this year, and then we had all those terrible temperatures in July, and so a lot of trees we're seeing completely turning brown throughout. And that thumbnail test is something certainly you can do. Now if you do the thumbnail test and you check the pliability and it's a little more brittle, if the thumbnail, when you scratch through that, you see that you have a brown on there, and then if you break it and you hear a snap and it's brown underneath the bark, well, chances are that that tree should probably come out and it's probably not going to respond.
Okay, and that should be checked on several of the branches.
Yeah, you don't want to just check just one branch, kind of go out around the whole tree, check it a couple different places, and if that's pretty consistent throughout the whole tree, if you see that browning and if it's real brittle and if branches snap, you may consider removing that tree.
Okay, you just have to cut your losses and plant another tree.
Yeah, think about planting it a little bit later, or this fall or maybe next spring or something. Okay.
Well, Mark, I sure appreciate your time today.
Yeah.
Thank you for all the information.
Yeah, appreciate it. Come on out and visit us, and let's keep watch of that pecan tree over on the Capitol grounds, because we still got another year or so to go on it, and I'll be anxious to see how these trees do, as well as when they get moved back out onto the Capitol grounds.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.